Okay, so we're finishing up Micah real quick. There's not a whole lot, and then we're going to move into 2 Kings. We were talking about Judah last week being enmeshed in sin, people architects, if you will, of their iniquity. How they rejected truth. That the rulers of Judah, they hated good, they loved evil. They were, even if you remember in mentioning last week, that they were cannibalistic to a degree. I don't know. Actually, I take that back. I don't. To the degree part, I don't know how you're cannibalistic to a degree. You either are or you aren't. The love of money was a compelling motive for judges and priests and prophets. There we see in Micah chapter 3 and verse 11, her leaders pronounce judgment for a bribe, her priests instruct for a price, and her prophets divine for money. Yet they lean on the Lord, saying, "Is not the Lord in our midst? Calamity will not come upon us." And so they were all in it for the money, and for whatever reason, we can't exactly pinpoint. Some people are in it. Even Paul talked about people preaching from selfish motives, right? And so it could be that they did not feel that they were supplied enough in order to live, and so they kind of had a side hustle of bribery going on. It could be that they were supplied plenty, but they were just greedy. There's not a one thing that we can pin down other than to say that it is the evil of a nation, the evil of a people that have immersed themselves in sin. And I don't see how anyone could really look at a prophet during this time, an apostle during the first century, or ministers since that time, if they're just motivated for money. I truly don't understand that. Imagine how the people would see you, in looking out and saying, yeah, everybody else is saying he's a good prophet, or he's a good apostle, or he's a good minister. But I know the truth because last week I gave him $20, to get this and that. That was, unfortunately, at least in the early days of Roman Catholicism, a big thing in bribing the Roman Catholic Church in order for land grants and what have you. Even before land grants, typically during the Middle Ages, there was the selling of indulgences. If you remember that, that you could, bribe, essentially, God. That you could buy an indulgence and, lessen the time that someone would spend in purgatory. But we have Judah, who is immersed in all of this. And Micah, he was the first prophet to really give a specific prophecy of Jerusalem's destruction. Now, a century later, Jeremiah, he foretold the destruction of Jerusalem. And the temple, the false priests and prophets, and they demanded his death. Over in Jeremiah 26, verses 17 and 18. Jeremiah 26, 17 and 18. It says, "Then rose up certain of the elders of the land and spoke to all the assembly of the people, saying, Micah, the Morshite, prophesied in the days of Hezekiah, the king of Judah." So Jeremiah is over here talking about Micah and saying, this is what he said, "Thus saith the Lord of hosts, Zion shall be plowed like a field, and Jerusalem shall become heaps, and the mountain of the house as the high places of the forest." Everything is going to be torn down. And, when we look to kind of another destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70, when Rome came in, you can go to Jerusalem now, and there's really just the one wall that's called the Wailing Wall that's there. And you'll see many Orthodox Jews praying, but they still have boulders. Some of them, they have kind of had to estimate the weight based off of density and what have you. Some of them weighing 100,000 pounds that were just completely toppled over. But they're still laying there on the ground. And so in the midst, in Micah, in the midst of these scenes of sin and judgment, he prophesies of the coming of Christ. And he specifies the very city of his birth, and even foretells the establishment of the church with their peace, unity, and blessings there. We don't have time to read it, but in Micah chapters 4 and 5. So if you want a prophecy, a very detailed prophecy, you can just read those two chapters. The book of Micah is really a perfect reflection of Genesis chapters 3 through 12. Genesis 3, we know the fall, up through the call of Abram at that time. In Genesis chapter 12, there at the beginning. And the background of redemption. Remember, Genesis 3:6 introduces sin. Right? Genesis 3:15 and Genesis 12:3 with the fruition of Christ. Because in Genesis 3:15, that's when he's talking about the seed of the woman, and then Genesis 12:3 talking about the nations being blessed and the people rising up and what have you. That's God's answer to sin. And the theme of Micah 1 is sin and judgment. And we see here. And then, Micah 7 and verse 20, you will give truth to Jacob and unchanging love to Abraham, which you swore to our forefathers from the days of old. So there's sin and judgment and the answer to that. And Micah 7:20 there, God's promise to Abraham looking at Calvary, that's God's remedy for sin and a means of averting judgment. And so the prophets kind of certified there in Micah chapter 7 and verse 19 that he will again have compassion on us. He will tread our iniquities underfoot. Yes, you will cast all their sins into the depths of the sea. So Micah, he begins his work talking about sin and judgment and the sorrow that comes with it, but then he ends his book with the promise of salvation and joy, right? He doesn't say those people are going to receive it, but when he's prophesying there in chapters 4 and 5 about Christ and coming and what have you, it is, and this is what's going to happen. He again is going to have compassion on us. And he'll tread our iniquities underfoot. He'll cast out all of their sins. And that's how it's going to work. Any thoughts or comments?
I think we'd be remiss not to discuss Micah chapter 6, verse 8. It tells us exactly, precisely, how we should live our lives daily. Because this is what does the Lord require of you? Do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with your God. If we don't do those three small things, I don't know how we can get it. This is the Lord requires it of you.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we tie, and I know that some people can look at the Bible and they can say, well, it's really confusing, right? The Bible actually isn't confusing. What has made Scripture confusing is man-made commentaries on the Bible, right? And an example for, to give, Ecclesiastes 12 and verse 13, right? This is the conclusion of the whole matter. After everything has been said, after everything has been seen, fear God and keep His commandments. That is man's purpose, right? And yet people, instead of looking at that one verse, they'll go out and buy books and, what is this life for? And why am I here? What's my purpose? Well, God already said that. It's to fear Him and keep His commandments. And we can tie that to John in the New Testament, who says, and His commandments are not burdensome. And then we can tie that to Jesus, who, if you do think they're burdensome and you're tired and you're weary and you're just worn down, Come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Well, what are the commandments that we're supposed to keep? I mean, there's so many. Obviously, we're not necessarily keeping all of the Old Testament commandments. You know, even just the 10 Commandments, not all of them carry over, right? But a majority of them do. Most do. So what are these commandments that we're supposed to keep? And then we can come back and we can say, okay, well, Micah 6 and verse 8, seek justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God. And then from there, we kind of explore, what are these three things? What justice are we talking about? Are we talking about justice for me when someone does me wrong? Because that's not it. The Bible has an answer for that. And in the sense that God says, vengeance is mine. I will repay. The Old Testament, the Lord will fight for you. You hold your peace. Okay, so it's not justice for me that I'm seeking, but it's God's justice, right? Love mercy. Okay, well, who am I supposed to be mercy? Who am I supposed to show mercy to? To everybody. It's the same mercy that God explores out. And this idea of humble and walk humbly with your God. Those that are strong, we can pull in another verse. Those that are strong, take care. Bear one another's burdens, so fulfill the law of Christ. And you that are strong, keep a watch out for yourself because you can fall just as quickly. Right?
Right.
Did you have something, sir?
In Ecclesiastes, was that 12, verse 13?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And so it's really the Bible, and I'm not the first person to say this, but the Bible truly is its own best commentary. If we would get into the Bible. See, so many people, they look, and to a degree I understand, right? There are certain things that, we look outside the Bible for help in understanding concepts or what have you. What happens, though, and where there's a shortcoming, is that people will pick up a book, right? It's a religious book, but it's not a biblical, the Bible. So they'll pick up a religious book and they'll read through it, and they'll say, "Oh, this is great," But they're not taking that book that they're reading and seeing how it lines up with Scripture. They're just looking at that book because that book is geared more towards their feelings and social economics and psychology and all of this, right? And there's plenty of instances where they'll read books. There's like the Prayer of Jabez was really popular back then, or there's the Circle Maker, and so they'll read all of these books. You're like, wow, that's fantastic. But then they completely maybe ignore what's already there. I'm not saying that we shouldn't read commentaries to try to get insight on the Scriptures. What I am saying is that we have to be mindful Christians and understand that commentaries and these books, they are not inspired. They come from the perspective of a man. Just like when I get up on Sundays, whether it's teaching a class or preaching a sermon, is that y'all are getting the Bible as I see it, so to speak, right? And my job is to try to see it as best as I can, how God sees it. But I'm still, just like every other preacher on the planet, I'm still just a man. I make mistakes. There are things that maybe I don't fully understand. And so that's why it's key to where even if you are a faithful Christian on Sunday mornings, to sit there and go back and look at your notes and see, okay, am I seeing a connection here? Is there something that it just doesn't jive with me? And maybe I need to ask about this or talk about this or study it more for myself. But yeah, to Rachel's point, that seek justice, love mercy, walk humbly with your God. It's not complicated. We just tend to make it that way. We tend to get in our own way a lot of the times, right? Any thoughts or comments, though? Please. Okay, then. That's all right. That's okay. That's okay.
Well,
Yes, ma'am.
okay, I have one.
Sure.
Why is it that we love mercy for ourselves, but it's so hard to give to somebody else? That's a $49 question of the day.
That's for human, I guess.
Huh?
That was $75 now, not 49.
I said because we're human, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, it's.
I think it depends. I have no problem with mercy for 99% of stuff, but when it comes to doing what's right, doing what's godly, if someone is not living right, doing right, acting right, it doesn't matter how much mercy I give someone, they're not going to have mercy from God. I think we have to look at it in that perspective, because we want mercy, so we give it. I have zero problem with that, Mike and I fight. I'm sorry, forget it, right? But if Mike says something against God, or he decides, hey,
Which I don't. Just to clarify. Just to clarify.
Example,
Okay.
if Mike decides tomorrow, I think I'm no longer going to be preaching for God, I'm going to go over to a new church. I can't give him mercy. We can't give him mercy, nor should we show him mercy. We should show him loving kindness and tell him, dude, that's not right. So you have to decide your mercy, what it comes down to. Is it godly? Is it personal? Or how is it going to ultimately help someone's salvation?
And that can, and from the human perspective, it can look harsh. And it can look unloving. It just can. Because we have become a culture that is so immersed in how people feel, that we often forget how God feels. And here's the thing, people will say, well, Jesus ate with sinners, right? He ate with sinners, he ate with tax collectors, he ate with prostitutes, right? But here's the thing, when Jesus met with them, he did not go there to endorse what they were doing. And every time he walked away, the people were changed. Right? He didn't go there to meet with the prostitutes and said, hey, I think you're charging too much. But keep on doing what you're doing.
At least they don't pay taxes.
The people were changed. Right? And so often, because we don't want, how is it that the world is then? Is that if you stand for God, you're called a bigot, you're called phobic about something,
An idiot.
or you're called an idiot, whatever, and frankly, I don't care so long as God calls me faithful. That's all I care about. I was actually listening to a sermon yesterday, and there was a gentleman, he was preaching, and he was talking about the times that we live in. And he said, do you know what they call a Christian who is a young earth, 6-day creationist who believes that miracles have ceased and who studied at Oxford University? And the people said, what? And they said they call him an idiot. Because it doesn't fit the narrative of the world, right? And we can look at our brothers and sisters in Christ and we can see them in sin. And yes, there is mercy there, but the mercy, it's not about, I forgive you of your sin. Because that sin is ultimately, like David said, against you alone have I sinned, right? But the mercy is in trying to help them understand the path that they have chosen. Right? If it's someone in sin. If it's someone who has sinned against us, then that mercy is extending that forgiveness. And we do that in remembering what we have done and all that God has forgiven us of. Is it an easy process? No. It's not. Most of the time, it's not. And that's part of where all humility also ties into it. We know that the Bible says pride goes before destruction and an arrogant spirit before the fall, right? So humility plays a part of mercy in the sense that we have to be humble enough to say, look at everything that I have done against God. And yet, He still forgave me. And yet, as I'm trying to be faithful, He still loves me. He still provides for me. And being able to extend that same mercy. Right? And so, but we can only do that if we're humble. We can only do that if we sit there and lower ourselves to recognize what we have done and what we have been forgiven. Some people don't have a humble bone in their body, it seems, as to answer your question as to why it's so difficult. Some of it, their pride is too much. Some of it may be the way that they were, raised, the way that they were taught. Some of it might be because they attend a congregation where some lunatic preacher gets up there and starts saying that you are a little God. And there are preachers that get up there and say that. They'll be like, in Genesis, it says everything after its kind, and God created man in His own image. So if everything repeats after its kind, and God created man in His own image, what's that make you? That makes you God. And they will sit there and tell their people that. Yeah. I feel sorry for them in the day of judgment. Yes, ma'am.
Rachel said it when she was saying about this mercy, respect. You're saying about the tumbles. Y'all are actually on, you can tell y'all are on the same page. That's good. You're different.
I'm waiting.
That's the thing.
I've got so many issues, I've got a subscription.
Well, mine's verbal.
Either way.
He's looking for medicine.
As far as that goes, we seem to think that respect is given. We don't seem to understand respect is earned. It is never just given. You have to earn it. Lessons, like you said, the way they brought up and everything. If somebody's never been taught the lesson, why can you not humble yourself, show them mercy, and let them learn the lesson? So what if they're 60, 70 years old? I had an 84-year-old man that he provided an oldest living married couple. Either way, he provided all of his life. His wife took care of the kids. That's the way it was back then. He didn't know how to cook. And I was actually going in and clean for him. I didn't want to charge them because when you came out of their house, you felt it was almost a privilege to be in their home because God was relevant in that house.
Yeah.
And the day I came in, and he told me he wanted to talk to me, and I thought, oh great, and we're in the kitchen. That man sat me down at the kitchen table and at 84 years old asked me if I'd love to teach him. And I felt honored. I felt I had just won the lottery. And he did. His first roast, he beat me by a long shot. My dad was going around telling everybody what was potatoes weren't good.
And here's I think part of the takeaway. God comes first. I mean, is that always easy? No. Because, we're dealing with loved ones. We're dealing with longtime friends. But God comes first. Jesus said, if you love your father and mother more than me, you can have no part of me. If you're going to put your loved ones before me, then you're not for me. In Luke 9, 57 through 62, it's, I'll follow you, but let me first go back and say goodbye. I'll follow you, but let me do this. It's like, no. It doesn't mean that those people aren't important. Of course our loved ones are important to us. But they're not more important than God. Of course, the people in the world are important to us. Because as faithful Christians, we want people to be saved. We want people to know Jesus, right? So of course they're important to us. But is someone's feelings or their political agenda or their lifestyle, does that trump God? No, not in the slightest. I don't care, again, what anybody calls me, so long as God calls me faithful. Because that's the only judgment that matters. Thoughts or comments? Okay.
That's
I'm not gonna have another one.
No, that's fine. But where do we have to be? We're often so much in a rush to get through a particular book of the Bible or something, like we're not going to just get into a different book. I mean, come on. In fact, we finished up Micah, and now we're over in 2 Kings chapter 18, if you want to go ahead and turn there. Yeah. Like I said, some of these we're going to breeze through, you know?
Linda's trying to say something.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I got first and second Chronicles. Did I just not hear it before?
I might have misspoke. But we're in 2 Kings. I'm humble enough to say I could have misspoke. I'm humble enough to say that I might have misspoke and said, 2 Chronicles, but I'm arrogant enough not to go back on YouTube and see if I did.
Stay off of YouTube.
2 Kings. 2 Kings 18. Specifically 18 to 25. Did anybody else have Chronicles?
I did.
I guess I did
You
misspeak.
did?
I apologize.
I
I apologize that you kind of scribbled.
I
That you got to scribble out.
She copied off of me.
See, that's what it is. You got to stop sitting next to
It
Linda.
gives me a copying. So it's 2 Kings.
Now be honest, Susie, did you copy all people's tests in school too?
Mine.
Okay.
My best friend.
I did, only my friends were idiots.
What chapter?
18. Looking at 18 to 25. So the remember we're having to jump around because the books aren't in chronological order, So the Assyrian captivity of Israel left Judah in a standalone position for about 135 years. And Hezekiah, he's the 12th king of Judah, but he's the first to rule over Judah following the fall of Israel to Assyria. Okay? Imperfect in his life and rule, certainly, Hezekiah was only one of 4 kings in Judah to both begin and end his reign in truth and righteousness. Making mistakes along the way.
He was one of 4 out of how many?
He was one of only 4 kings.
Okay, out of how many?
I'm not sure as to how many we're counting at this period.
Just good.
20?
20.
Sounds good, if we're guessing.
Okay.
Honestly, I forgot to go back and see how many kings in this particular period.
We just gotta label him good.
Yeah, just
Yeah.
We wanna know all the
put a,
good
put a
ones.
check mark or something.
Okay, I'll put a circle on it.
There we go. So Ahaz, Hezekiah's father, was one of the most wicked kings of Judah.
Isn't that,
I'm sorry?
isn't that funny? Isn't that strange?
It is. Sometimes the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, and then sometimes the apple falls from the tree and then rolls downhill and gets in a stream that goes all the way down, and there's nothing like it.
If you've got a bad habit amongst your family and you've had to live with that bad habit, you want to change. You don't pick up that bad habit.
Well, I think it depends. I mean, you think of, alcoholism. That can be something that is generational. Domestic violence is something that can be generational. Racism, like Klan and stuff like that, that can be. I think it really kind of depends on, several things. It could be outside influences. It could be the environment. It could be, just like you said, is that, you know what, I saw this and I want no part of it in my life.
But when everybody in my family smoked, and that did not something that appealed to me. So I didn't do it, but they all did.
Yeah.
And they wouldn't talk religion, they wouldn't talk politics.
And they saw that and they said, I don't want anything to do with that.
So I'm just different, you know.
Yeah.
So anyway.
No, I think that it all depends. Ahaz, though, not having any faith or trust in God, he looked to Assyria for aid in their time of trouble, and he replaced the altar of burnt offering that was in the front of the temple with an Assyrian altar. And he served Baal, sacrificed his children to idols, walked just like the pagans did. And in 2 Chronicles 28 and verse 24, it says that he shut up the doors of the house of the Lord and he made altars in every corner of Jerusalem. Kind of interesting. I sit there and I read that and I think of the time during COVID and everything, people shutting up the doors of the church building and erecting the altars of the liquor stores and Walmarts all over, but, I'm not anti-vax or anything, okay? It was just a comment. Anyhow. So, okay.
Some of the things you insert, I just struggle with.
I'm just me, I ask Rachel, she said we argue and everything, and most of the time it's about, how I say things before I think them, and yeah. So when Hezekiah acceded the throne of Judah, he hesitated not in seeking to kind of wipe out the evil influence of his father on the nation and reestablish the right way of God. On the very first day of his reign, he opened and repaired the doors of the temple. That was his first act of office. We are opening up the temple. And he ordered the Levites, because remember, what was the priestly tribe? The Levites, I just said it.
Yeah.
Linda's over here like, oh yeah, you did. Okay. So he orders the Levites to sanctify themselves and the temple and to clean the temple with all of its furniture and the vessels from the defilements of his father. So he ascends to the throne, and the very first thing he does is say, all right, we're opening the doors to the temple. You priests, you need to cleanse yourselves. You need to sanctify yourselves. We're going to get in here. You're going to go in, and you're going to clean the temple. You're going to clean all of the furnishings, and we're going to get rid of all this other garbage. What must the people have thought at that time? Right. Now, here's the thing. Could you imagine, and I'll just make this comment and then we'll finish because we're at time. Could you imagine if that happened today? If someone walked into, well, we'll just say a preacher. A preacher goes into a congregation. He's new there. Just like he's kind of new to the throne, right? He's new there. He gets in and he looks around. All right, y'all need to get rid of half of this junk. Okay, we just need to start from scratch. I can almost guarantee you the first words out of someone's mouth are going to be like, you're not an elder. They're not going to care if he's right or wrong about getting rid of things that don't belong in God's house. Or the attitudes of God's people. They're just going to be like, you're not an elder, you're not a pastor. There's going to be all of these arguments, right? Instead of looking at what God wants. And see, that's what we have to do. I don't care who says something. If they say that, you know what, I don't think this belongs in the church, and they can express a reason why, and they can look at the Bible and say, look, this is what God says regarding these things, then that's what God says. Full stop. That's it. My feelings about it don't matter. It's what God says. Right? Yeah, I apologize for taking a couple of minutes after. So we'll pick up with Hezekiah reigning in Judah next week. Appreciate the comments, though. Thank y'all.